Hi, it's Jessie, and today I will be drinking Glow from Tea Drops, which is a blend of hibiscus, rosehip, cinnamon, and tart cherry. Honestly, sounds delicious. So I'm here with my quarterly wrap-up for spring-summer this year. As you might notice, this is 4 months rather than just 3. So it's not really quarterly. I kind of wanted to shift things so that I had December free, so I wouldn't be end of December, beginning of January. I could do all my yearly stuff and wouldn't have to do a quarterly wrap-up then. So there'll be this one and there'll be one in November, so they're really kind of more trimester than quarterly. I also have been reading way more than I expected this year. I am at like 50 some books already this year, whereas normally I read like 50 in a full year, not in half a year. So next year I think I'm going to change up my formatting and not do these quarterly. Anyway, I'll skip over I'll skip over any books I've talked about in another video. Those will be linked below in the description. Let's jump into this. So starting off with April. In April, I finished 8 books with an average rating of 3.5 stars, an average page count of 323 pages. For this wrap-up, I also kind of calculated the number of pages per day I read in the month, which isn't terribly accurate just because my books roll over. I don't stick to one book read within a month. But for April, I read about 86 pages per day. Of the 8 books that I read in April, Someone Who Will Love You in All of Your Damaged Glory, This Is How You Lose the Time War, and Unkindness of Magicians, Mrs. Houdini, and Beauty and the Beast were all for the Magical Readathon Owls, which was a readathon. I did a vlog. It was my first time vlogging, and it's okay. I'm getting better. So 3 more books then left over in April. In the 3-star category, I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. So I kind of got in a weird Jane Austen kick in the middle of April and only read 1 book because it took me forever to read it. But there's something about Jane Austen's style that really is hard for me to grab onto and get used to. But this is Sense and Sensibility is the first book Jane Austen published, and it's only the second one I've read so far. It wasn't bad. It was just very dense. There's really detailed descriptions of like personal finances in the middle of this that just kind of was hard, and I just found myself less interested in the characters than I was in, say, the Bennets from Pride and Prejudice. So I really do want to keep reading some more of Jane Austen's work. It's got to be when the mood strikes me, I think. And then the other 2 books I read in April were both 4 stars. So I finished up Border Town, which is a collection of a bunch of people edited by Holly Black and Ellen Kushner. So the Borderland series is a series of urban fantasy books and short story collections that were started in the 80s, and it focuses on the city that takes place somewhere between the Feyland and the real world. There are full novels that take place in this world. There are more anthologies, so it's just a lot of authors in the 80s, fantasy authors in the 80s, contributed to these works. This one was written in... This anthology was written in 2011 after a 13-year gap, and they kind of reason it really well in this series by the border between Border Town and the real world gets closed for 13 years, but 13 years passes in the real world and only 13 days passes in Border Town. So it's this really interesting way of bringing back the old characters that people that read this series in the 80s would be familiar with, while still allowing new authors to write in the world to introduce new characters. So this book takes place very shortly after the Way reopens, and I really, really liked the anthology. So any short story collection is going to have some stories that will be better and some that will be worse, but what I really loved about this one is, 1, the concept is really clever. Both the fact that it's all grounded in one city, so like all of these stories kind of interweave together, but also just the way they did that time skip so that you could have the old and new characters really woven together. I can imagine that if I had been a huge fan of the original series, this would have really felt like coming home. So I really love that. And then, like I said, that unifying concept that really framed it. I'm only just starting to get into anthologies, but like I read Jordan Kahn's anthology last year, and while the stories were mostly good, they were so unrelated to one another that it was kind of hard for me to enjoy it. So this one all being so cohesive that they mostly take place in one place, and that some of the characters it weave between different stories really helped this. So I really liked this anthology. The other thing I finished in April was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So originally I had planned on reading the Farseer trilogy along with the Catch Up Book Club run by Becca over at Becca in the Books. But it just seems like it's impossible for me to keep up. I started this early, like before they actually started reading it, and then it almost immediately fell behind them. I'm not going to tell you too much about it because a lot of the other booktubers I've seen reviewing this or reading this right now gives too much information about this. But this is about a young boy that is the bastard son of the king in waiting, and he gets brought to the castle when his maternal grandfather decides he wants to get rid of him. And that's really all I think you need to know about this. Obviously, by the title, you can tell he ends up being trained to be an assassin. And this first book really follows Fitz growing up. It starts when he's 4 years old, 6 years old, and ends when he's like 15. So it's really coming of age, and it follows him as he tries to figure out his place in this hierarchy of the world. This book had some things going for it and some things I just didn't really like. It's really slow, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just made it hard for me to read. There'd be a couple really great chapters in a row, followed by a chapter or two that just dragged and that I wasn't interested in. So it was that kind of back and forth pacing that can get really frustrating as a reader. But one of the things I absolutely love is Robin Hobb's writing style. It's very beautiful and almost flowery. Like, I would almost say it's flowery, but it's also doesn't feel like anything said in this was unnecessary. Really feels like Robin Hobb, like she says exactly what she means to say in exactly as many words as she needs to say it is. And then on top of that, for how slow this went, the ending just made it all feel worth it. So really good series, really enjoying it. Moving on to May, I read 12 books, which was like way more than I expected. Once again, my average rating was 3.5 stars. Books were an average of 326 pages long, and I read an average of 126 pages per day. Of these books, The Boat, written by Nam Lee and adapted by Matt Hune, Dragon Pearl by Yoon Ha Lee, The Descendant of the Crane, Little Fires Everywhere, and The Prince and the Dressmaker, and The Descent of Monsters. And The Descent of Monsters were all read for the Asian Readathon. So check out my Readathon vlog for thoughts on that. And then The Descent of Monsters and The Ascent to Godhood were both covered in my Tensorate review, but so check that out if you haven't. I really love this series and I want more people to read it. I also read Eragon this month and did a whole Inheritance Cycle review for that, so kind of a rant. Go ahead and check that out. Okay. For the rest of the books I read in May, I had one 2-star book that was Nevertheless She Persisted. There's a few different anthology and short story collections by this title because it's kind of a good title for like a feminist collection, but this is the 2020 flash fiction collection that was released by Tor. I don't really know what to say about it. I'm sure it's a really fine collection of stories if you like flash fiction, but I just don't think it's for me. All the stories were only a couple pages long and it was just too short for me to get interested in any of them. There were 2 additional books that were 3 stars. I finally finished The Stand by Stephen King. This is one I started reading a while ago and then lost, like, because of library loaning times, I lost it for a while and then I got it back like a month later. If you don't already know what this is about, and I definitely didn't because I just picked it up on recommendations, book is about a super flu that was being created by the military being released into the public, and then it kind of follows the release of this flu, the way this flu affects people, and then the after effects of this. So definitely not necessarily the best book to be reading right now, so just be aware of that. hate this book. I really, really liked sections of this book. It just was, there was too much. There was so much that didn't need to be there. I had a friend that read this a couple of months before me, well before pandemic stuff started happening, and he sent me after he finished it, he's like, it was really good, but about 400 pages too long, and that is incredibly accurate. As an example, the book had an ending, which was really, really anticlimactic to start, but after the ending, there was like another 3 hours of audiobook left. It just kept going and going and going. So, could have been good if it was maybe half the length. Finally, for April, I also read in the 3-star category, Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. At the beginning of this year, I started doing a reread of Harry Potter. I'm not going to keep reading it. To address the situation, J.K. Rowling is a terrible person. This is not news, honestly. It wasn't news when she became obviously a terrible person this year. Book 3 in particular, just to give it a quick review, was kind of disappointing to me. It's one of my favorite movies, and I don't really remember how I felt about it when I read the book for the first time, but there's a lot of plot devices that come up in Prisoner of Azkaban and Book 3 that never get used again, and so it just felt very contrived. Anyway, at this point, I'm done with the reread, at least for a while. When libraries physically start reopening, I might rent them. But I was listening to them on audiobook, and I looked it up, and authors do get credit every time their ebooks or audiobooks are loaned out from the library, and I just don't want to keep supporting J.K. Rowling, so at some point, if I can get a hold of the physical books, either the copies that my parents already own or from a library, I might continue rereading them, but at this point, that's on hold. And then finally, a 5-star read that I had this month was And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. This, if you don't know, is one of Murphy Napier's favorite books. And every time she read it, it made me think of Tuesdays with Morrie, which I read in high school and absolutely loved. So I told Murphy, I left her a comment and I said, if she read Tuesdays with Morrie, I'll read this. And of course, she happened to start it the next day. So I read this. I thought it was really sweet. It made me cry a lot. The only thing I kind of wish about it is that I hadn't known as much going into it, because some of the emotions I felt a little inauthentic. It felt like I was crying because I knew I was supposed to cry, kind of thing. But this is, to keep it very brief, because this is the tiniest of books. From me, what I'll tell you it's about a grandfather thinking about his son and his grandson and reflecting back on his life and also talking some with his grandson. It's a really sweet book. It's really short. I sat down and read it in a night, so definitely worth it if you can get your hands on a copy. In June, I read 9 books with an average rating of 3.4 stars and an average page count of 357 pages, and this averaged out to 107 pages read per day. I finished Eldest and Brisingar from the Inheritance Cycle in this month, and once more check that series review. There are 4 books that I read in June that I'm not going to talk about because they're for this long scale secret TBR video that I'm working on, so you'll have to wait for that. Other than that, I had one 4-star read in June. That was Miranda and Milan by Catherine Duckett. This is part of Tor's In Our Own World ebook for 2020, which is a collection of queer fantasy and sci-fi books that they released 2019 in June, and then they released it again in 2020. It was good. It's about the Prospero and his daughter returning to Milan after the events that take place in The Tempest. I've never read The Tempest. It's on my list of Shakespearean works that I want to read, but at this point, I haven't read it. And I'm not sure if being familiar with The Tempest, more so than I am, would have made this a better or worse experience. That aside, I thought it was a really cute story. The actual romance in it, the love story, was really sweet and cute. The plot itself, outside of that, was pretty thin. It's honestly probably closer to a 3-star read objectively, but I rate my queer books way more leniently. And finally, I read 2 5-star books in the month of June, both of them also from In Our Own Worlds 2. The first of these was Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. I have been really wanting to read this for a while. Seanan McGuire has quickly become one of my favorite authors, so I was pretty sure I would love this, and I was right. Honestly, I was kind of holding off because I want to buy these books physically because it's a series and I like having series to sit on a shelf. They look really nice, whatever. But now I've read it and I know I really love it, so I still want to buy it and read the rest of the series. So I know this series kind of follows different stories every book, but this first book is about a school for children who have gone through portals or doorways into other worlds. Think, Alice in Wonderland, Narnia, that kind of thing. It's kind of, the school itself is kind of marketed towards parents as a place to cure their children of their delusions, which honestly gave me such big, conversion therapy vibes, the way it's described in the first couple chapters. But in actuality, the school is there to help these children cope with the real world now that they've returned to it, even though they would much rather be living in that world they traveled to. I loved this book for just so many reasons. It explicitly named a character as asexual, which is something I've literally never seen before in a book. It's got trans rep, and there's just so much love and great relationships built in this. Each world that got described was given so much care and was so vivid and wonderful, even though we don't get to see the worlds, we just get to hear the children talk about them. And then, like I said, those relationships, the friendships between these children was really sweet. There are definitely fair complaints to be made. One of them I see a lot is that the children don't really act like children, but honestly that made sense to me in the context of the world, so I really enjoyed it. And finally, also from In Our Own Worlds too, was Sisters of the Vast Black by Lena Rather. This was a very slow book to start, and I wasn't sure what I'd think about it because I'm not a big sci-fi fan. But as the story went on, I really fell in love with the characters and their stories. This is about nuns that travel through space, helping basically anyone that needs it. It was very character-driven, and you get to know each of the sisters in this group. You get to know what they want and why they joined the convent and things like that. In my review of this, I described it as like Firefly but gayer, and that's a pretty accurate representation of this book. Like I said, it was slow and character-driven, so it's definitely not going to be for everyone, but it's short enough that that kind of story didn't bore me personally. And it's definitely really, really well written, and I'd be interested to read more from this author. In July, I read a whopping 14 books with an average page count of 326 and 3.1 average rating, so a little bit lower. This put me at reading an average of 147 pages per day. I completed 6 books for my secret project, I promise, and the next month that should be coming. One of those books that I read was Holes, which I also read for the reading rush, along with The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. My vlog for that should already be out, so watch that if you want to hear about my thoughts on that. I also started Frankenstein for the reading rush, but I didn't finish it until afterwards. This one I gave about a 4 stars. It was really, really good and very close to a 5-star read. But I couldn't give it a pass on the Islamophobia that happened in the middle of it, plus there was some stuff towards the end that I didn't like so much. I know product at the time and all, but it was hard to ignore. I read a lot of classics in July, and honestly, Frankenstein was my favorite. Even if you think you know the story, it's definitely worth it to read the original. Breaking down the rest of the books that I read in July, I DNF'd Call of the Wild on day 1 of July. I had been reading this, my alma mater picked it as a book club pick, and so I'd been reading it along with that, and I got about halfway through it, and the book club ended, and nobody had really participated, so there wasn't that incentive to continue, and once the book club was done, I just didn't really seem worth finishing it. It's a classic, so you probably know, but Call of the Wild is about a dog that's raised as a family pet, but the family falls on some hard financial times, so the dog gets sent to work as a sled dog in Alaska. It's all from the point of view of the dog, which could be interesting, but honestly, it just felt like reading torture porn, but for animals. I didn't like it at all. I gave it 1 star, and I don't know, the reviews seemed really, really well loved, and it seems like there's some messages in there that maybe I was just missing, but I didn't get it, and I didn't like it. Moving on to 4-star reads, I finally finished Royal Assassin. This literally took me 99 days to complete. This is the second book of the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, which is about Fitz and all of his misfortunes. I have no idea why these books take me so long to read. I really enjoy the story here, and Hobb has just like a fantastic writing style. All of the things I said about Assassin's Apprentice carry over for this, but Royal Assassin gets even better. Honestly, the characters get refined more, the plot gets a little bit... I don't want to say the plot thickens, that sounds so cheesy, but the plot gets a little bit stronger. The only thing I really didn't like in this one in particular was the romance. It wasn't really a poorly done romance. It was very realistic and fairly well developed. It annoyed me. I think I just really don't like hearing about teenage boys' lust. And also with 4 stars, I read No Man of Woman Born. This is the NB Book Club pick for July, so I decided to get it since I could get it on Scribd. Though this is a collection of short stories that all feature non-binary and trans protagonists, and it all kinds of riffs on, the Macbeth prophecy. No man of woman born can do X thing. Like I generally experience with short stories, I wanted a lot of these to be longer, which is a compliment, really. I think most of these stories would have made really, really great full-length novels. I also absolutely love that this contained content warnings at the start of every story, which is just something I think more books should include. The downside of this collection was that the twists were really repetitive. You kind of knew what was coming because of the premise of the short story collection. I think I would recommend picking up the collection, but not reading it in 2 days the way I did. If you read one story every couple of days, it would be really well done, really good to read. But really, these stories said a lot of things that I wish I had heard years ago about gender identity and figuring yourself out and things like that. So I think it's a really just great set of stories to read, whether you're trying to figure out your own gender or just trying to understand somebody else's. And in 5 stars, I read The Deep by River Solomon. I don't have this physically with me right now because I lent it to my roommate. This book was just absolutely beautiful. So this is about the Wajanru, which are aquatic beings descended from pregnant slaves that were thrown overboard from the slave ships. One of them is the historian who holds all of the memories of the Wajanru except for once a year when they share these memories with all of their people. And the current historian in the time of the story feels like they just can't handle holding these memories anymore. Honestly, plot aside, this is a just gorgeous examination of cultural trauma and the importance of knowing your history even when it's hard and sharing those experiences, and it was just really powerful. For me, what I got out of it was a little more of just the trauma that I inflict on others by expecting them to educate me kind of felt like what I was getting out of that, which was a really powerful message to get at this time. There's also this really amazing meta story going on. This book is based on a song written by Clipping, and then that song was based on a DJ that did this kind of album. And so I listened to the song by Clipping, which is Daveed Diggs' band, afterwards, and it's not even a song I would normally like, but knowing the context of it just made it really, really interesting. So I really recommend that too. Anyway, I think I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about this, so I'm gonna link Jesse from Bow Ties and Books review in the description because I think you should really listen to their review because they're just better than me. And then one more book that I read in this month was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I just didn't write this one because I don't really know how I feel about it. It's almost more of an art book to me with just little bits of wisdom tacked in it than an actual story. It's cute and heartwarming, but really wasn't entertaining. So I just didn't really know how to rate it because it didn't really feel like a novel. And that's everything. Like I said at the top, I'm thinking of better ways to do wrap-ups just so they don't end up getting really, really long. But let me know in the comments what your favorite book that you've read this summer so far is. And if you've read Call of the Wild and enjoyed it, can you let me know why? Because I'm genuinely curious about what the appeal of this book is. And as always, content warnings for the books I talked about in this video will be at the very bottom of the description.